Mr. Armand was a man of success, sharp suits, sharper decisions. He owned multiple businesses, traveled often, and commanded silence with his presence. His wife, Anaya, lived in his grand home, surrounded by opulence, yet drowning in loneliness. Their conversations had turned to nods and formalities. Every smile she gave was rehearsed, every gaze from him, distant. Anaya once dreamed of love, the kind that bloomed in the little things. A morning touch, a shared laugh. But the mansion echoed with formality now, and her heart began to feel more like furniture, expensive, polished, untouched. Rahul had been working in their home for over a year. Younger, quiet, respectful. He came from a small town, sent money back home, and never once overstepped. Anaya had barely noticed him at first. He cleaned, organized, and faded into the background. Until one morning, when she struggled with a stubborn jar lid, and he appeared silently, twisted it open, and offered a shy smile. It was a small moment, but in a house where no one paid attention to her struggles, it lingered. He began appearing more often when she needed help. Without words, he'd hand her a shawl when the wind blew cold. He refilled her water glass before it emptied. When she was coughing one afternoon, he brought warm herbal tea with honey, his mother's recipe, he said. She had never asked for these things. But somehow Rahul noticed, and noticed in a way that didn't feel performative. Not like Armand's assistant, who scheduled gifts on anniversaries. Not like the photoshopped smiles in family portraits. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, Anaya found herself watching Rahul from the second-floor window. He was arranging flowers, carefully, as if each petal meant something. She felt a pang of what? She didn't know. Loneliness? Curiosity? Something deeper? She turned away quickly, as if caught in an act of betrayal, even though nothing had happened. Days passed. Rahul continued his work, never lingering, never suggestive. But she began to wait for his footsteps. Not in longing, but in comfort. She started asking him questions, simple ones. How long had he worked here? Did he like the city? His answers were brief, polite, but warm. Armand noticed none of this. He came home late, phone in hand, eyes on deals. When Anaya asked him to stay for dinner, he declined with a grunt. When she mentioned the garden, he waved it off. The distance between them was no longer subtle. It had become a fact. That night, Anaya sat alone on the veranda. She looked around at everything she had, silk curtains, crystal vases, chandeliers. But the emptiness inside her refused to be decorated. From the corner of her eye, she saw Rahul walking toward the serving quarters. He paused, looked up at the stars, then continued. For a brief second, their eyes met. She didn't smile. Neither did he. But something had shifted. Quietly. Unspoken. Irreversible. Anaya started noticing the comfort she felt around Rahul was no longer just relief from her husband's absence. It was something else. Something warmer, softer, and more dangerous. She began asking Rahul to stay a little longer in the room after finishing tasks. Not with words, but with silence that lingered. With eyes that asked questions she didn't voice. Rahul, ever polite, always stood at a respectful distance, but he noticed the shift too.
Her tone had changed.
Her questions had depth. She asked about his childhood, his dreams, his mother. No one had ever cared about that before. Certainly not in this house. One morning, she complimented his handwriting after seeing the grocery list. He looked surprised. No one's ever mentioned that before, he said. She smiled. Then they weren't paying attention. It was a simple exchange, but it settled between them like a secret only they knew. Their conversations became longer. She laughed around him now, not loud or flirtatious, but genuine, surprised even by herself. Rahul told her about the fields behind his village, how he'd run through them after school. She closed her eyes and pictured it. It was the first time in years she'd imagined a life that felt real. Armand remained distant. He had started spending more time in another city. Calls grew shorter, colder. Once, Anaya called him just to hear his voice. He responded with irritation and hung up before she could say goodbye. One evening, Anaya wasn't feeling well. Rahul noticed before she mentioned it. Without waiting, he brewed ginger tea with lemon and brought it to her room. She looked at him with a tired smile and said, "How do you always know?" He hesitated, then replied, "Maybe, because I look." That night, as he stood near the door, she asked him to sit for a moment. He hesitated, then did. They talked in whispers. She asked if he ever missed home. He nodded. Then he asked, "Do you ever feel alone here?" Her reply came after a pause. "Every day." There was a silence that felt heavy, not awkward, just full. Full of understanding. Full of something they were both too careful to name. His fingers brushed hers as he stood up. Neither moved away. A long pause. Then she slowly pulled her hand back. He left the room without another word. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her heart wasn't racing, but something deeper stirred, something that made her restless. She thought about his voice, his stories, the kindness he didn't know he showed. She wasn't falling for a man. She was falling for attention, for presence, for being seen. In his room, Rahul sat awake, staring at the ceiling fan.
He knew what was happening.
He had seen enough movies, heard enough gossip in the staff quarters. But this didn't feel cheap. It felt wrong, yes, but not filthy. Just fragile. And dangerous. Neither of them had touched a boundary.
Not yet.
But both understood something had already been crossed. And there was no going back. The air in the house felt different the day Arman left for his 3-day business trip. Anaya didn't mention it to Rahul, but he noticed the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was expectant. She moved through the rooms with more calm, as if something inside her had found space to breathe. That evening, after dinner, Anaya lingered in the hallway longer than usual. She called out to Rahul, asked if he had time to sit for a cup of tea. He hesitated, looked unsure, then nodded. She prepared it herself and brought 2 cups into the living room. Their conversation was slow but steady. She asked about his father. He asked if she ever painted. She used to. For the first time, her laugh was unguarded, softer. She looked at him directly and said, "I feel like I forget who I am sometimes." Rahul responded quietly, "You don't look lost to me." That line hung between them. She looked away, eyes on her cup. "No one said anything kind to me in years."
He didn't reply.
She continued, not without expecting something back. Her voice trembled slightly. The room was silent except for the ticking clock. When she looked up, his eyes were already on her. She reached across the small table, slowly, cautiously, and placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away. That one moment was louder than anything spoken. He could have moved. She could have stopped. But they didn't. Instead, his thumb brushed across her hand, lightly, nervously. She closed her eyes. When their lips finally met, it was slow, hesitant, full of everything they hadn't said. It wasn't hunger. It was sorrow, need, and years of emotional starvation crashing together. They didn't speak during or after. When it ended, they both sat in silence. Neither tried to explain. Rahul stood and left the room without a word. Anaya remained seated, her eyes on the untouched tea. The next morning was colder. Not in temperature, but in spirit. Rahul moved through his tasks with quiet urgency. Anaya stayed in her room longer. When they did cross paths, they didn't look at each other. The house that once held tension now held guilt. By afternoon, Arman messaged. His trip had ended early. He'd be home that night. Rahul read the message and felt panic rise in his throat. Everything from the night before came rushing back. He considered packing his bag and leaving before sunset. But he didn't. Instead, he worked through the day silently, eyes down, avoiding corners where she might appear. Anaya seemed calm. Almost too calm. Her voice didn't shake. Her instructions were clear. But there was something new in her silence. An edge. A buried storm. Evening fell. Lights flicked on. The air changed again. When Arman walked through the door, Rahul stood behind a curtain in the hallway, breath shallow. He didn't hear what was said, but he saw Anaya greet her husband with a quiet nod. No warmth. No guilt in her smile. Just silence. And he realized this wasn't just an affair. It was the unraveling of something much bigger. Armand noticed the shift within days. It wasn't what Anaya said, it was what she didn't. Her words were fewer, her expressions unreadable. She moved through the house like someone who had let go of pretending. He watched her, trying to place what felt unfamiliar. Rahul, too, seemed different, less present, quieter, careful. Armand began observing more closely. A misplaced scarf in the wrong room. A cup in the kitchen with lipstick at an hour she never drank tea. And then the gardener mentioned Rahul had been seen on the main floor late one evening. It wasn't accusation, just careless chatter. But it stayed with him. That night, Armand entered the bedroom early, an unusual move. Anaya was already lying down, book in hand. He stood in the doorway longer than necessary, then asked, "Has the boy been working late?" She didn't flinch. "Sometimes. There's more work lately." He stared at her. "You trust him?" Her reply was calm. "Do you?"
He didn't respond.
Downstairs, Rahul sat on the edge of his bed, hands clenched, jaw tight. He had heard enough. The tension had reached a line he could no longer ignore. He had betrayed his own values, crossed a line he never imagined. He couldn't eat,
Couldn't sleep.
the silence around him felt like judgment. By morning, he had made his decision. He wrote a letter, his handwriting shaky but honest. He didn't mention details, didn't confess what wasn't needed. He simply thanked her for seeing him, for listening, for making him feel human. And he apologized, not for feelings but for actions. When Anaya found the note, something inside her cracked. Not dramatically, just quietly. She folded it once, then again, and tucked it inside her book. Rahul was gone by then. No goodbyes. No explanations. Just absence. Armand said nothing when he noticed the servant had disappeared. No questions. No anger. Just an understanding that something had passed between them, something he couldn't prove, yet felt in his bones. In the following weeks, life returned to its usual rhythm, but the tone had changed. Armand and Anaya spoke when needed, shared space without warmth, functioned like partners in a well-practiced play. The illusion of normalcy was maintained, but the air between them had frozen. Anaya often found herself at the window, not waiting, just remembering. The way Rahul had looked at her, like she mattered. That gaze was gone now, and she missed it more than she wanted to admit. A new servant was hired. Efficient, distant, quiet. Just how Armand preferred. But to Anaya, every footstep now echoed differently. She never spoke of Rahul, never mentioned the letter. But some nights, she reread it by the soft light of her lamp, running her fingers over the words as if they could bring back what had already slipped away. Love hadn't found her. Escape hadn't freed her. And yet, for a brief moment, she had felt seen. That feeling faded, but the memory didn't. And some memories refused to die. They just wait in silence.